Hello and welcome back to the Business Career College online continuing education series of courses. My name is Colin Johnson. I'll be your instructor today. I look forward to working with you through our fraud detection and prevention course. I'm Director of Operations here at Business Career College. So fraud detection and prevention when it comes to our business is an integral part of my role as an operational manager here. And I hope to share today with you some tips and tricks that you can use to spot fraud both in your personal life as well as with your clients. So in this course, we're going to look at a few things. We're going to start off looking at what fraud is. And that's a basic introduction, but it's always best to start with the basics. Once we've introduced the topic of fraud, we're going to look at 5 different types of fraud specifically in today's course. Those are phishing, spoofing, phone scams, what's called a man-in-the-middle attack, and identity theft. As we work through these, for each of the topics, what we're going to look at is we're going to learn what that kind of fraud involves and what it is. Then we're going to look at some tips to identify when that kind of fraud is happening, followed up with some tips on how to prevent that kind of fraud where possible. After we've covered those 5 types of fraud, we're going to look at some best practices. And we're going to look at those best practices in 2 different ways. First of all, we're going to look at best practices of how you can prevent that kind of fraud in your day-to-day life and as a business practitioner yourself. And then we're going to look at some best practices that will help you protect your customers from fraud where those best practices are different from the individual best practices. There's a fair bit of ground to cover today. So let's get started. So when we look at what fraud is, basically it is any act of deceiving or misrepresenting. Another way of saying it is the intentional perversion of truth in order to induce another to part with something of value or to surrender a legal right. So those 2 are definitions as we'd see in the Merriam-Webster's dictionary. When we break it down a little more, I think the first definition we looked at makes it really simple. So it's any time that someone is deceiving or misrepresenting to you. But the second definition really gets into the reason or reasons why someone might be committing fraud, and that's to get you to part with something of value. So when someone's committing fraud, we'll refer to them as a fraudster. And the act they're committing is either a fraud or a scam. Those are the 2 terms that we'll use in today's course. And when they're trying to get you to part with something of value, that isn't necessarily money or physical property. Often, when someone's committing fraud, their intent is to get information from you, get identifiable information from you, so that they can commit more fraud, and that information is useful to them over a long period of time. The types of fraud that we're going to look for are interconnected and interrelated for that reason. Sometimes your initial interaction with a fraudster is going to be one of them getting information from you, and you may have subsequent interactions or future interactions with them in which they're trying to actually make you part with money or property or take control of computer systems and whatnot. So that said, let's move into some specific examples of fraud that we're going to look at and look at how we can identify them and prevent them. The first kind of fraud that we're looking at is called phishing. Now, this has nothing to do with going out to the lake. It's not nearly as fun as that. But that analogy of thinking about it as a person fishing with a fishing rod is going to be quite useful, as you'll see in a moment, with helping you know what phishing is. So really, this is a type of fraud where the fraudster is trying to collect information from their targets. That's the primary goal in any phishing type of fraud attack. I mentioned fishing for fish out at a lake when I started here, and that to me is the best mental trigger. So I always think when I'm looking at phishing with a PH, P-H-I-S-I-N-G, I think of them as fishing for my information or trying to get my information from me. Often when someone's phishing, they'll be pretending to be an organization or an individual that you might trust. And their goal is to get information that can be used to commit further fraud or to commit theft. So they won't be concerned with basic information about you. They probably already have that, like your email address, but they may be looking for financial information from you, or they may be looking for more personal information from you that's more specific. So there's a few ways that they can do that. It may be done directly, so as we'll look at in an example in a few minutes, we'll see some of the direct ways they can be doing that, or it may be through what's called malware or spyware. And what malware and spyware are programs that get installed on your computer without your knowledge to collect information from your computer itself. So how do they get you to do this? There's a few different ways. There might be an incentive to provide the information. So it may be an offer where you click a link to find out working from home to make $500 a day with no work. It may be a contest or a financial reward. So it may be someone saying that you've won a cash prize, and to collect that prize, you just need to provide them with some information. And then the second way is they may have a consequence in place to encourage you to give your information out. So they may say that they're from a financial institution and that your accounts have been locked, and that to unlock your accounts, you have to click on the link that they've provided and provide some information to them. So looking at phishing, a few ways that you can spot a phishing attempt is ask yourself, do you have a relationship with this sender or this agency? So if you get an email from a bank that you don't have an account with, it's probably not a valid email. But that isn't by itself sometimes enough to help you spot that fraud or spot that phishing attempt. Once you've looked at that and it is someone you have a relationship with, then you want to look at the email address that that request is coming from. So you don't just want to look at the name that appears on the screen. So it may say TD Canada Trust as the name, but when you look at the actual email address, it's probably not going to come from TD Canada Trust's actual email server. It may be something very close, so it may say something like TD Canada Trust information.ca, and that's an indication that it's not a real email address collecting this information from you. An additional way that you can spot a phishing attempt is asking yourself, is this how they usually ask me for information? So does my bank usually ask me to put my password in by emailing something to me? And then the final way you can learn to spot phishing attempts is by checking the internet for lists of scams. So if you get something that you think is a scam, try to do an internet search on that scam, and you'll probably get some really good information on that. Now, a big part of this is how to avoid being phished or having your information phished from you. So the first way to prevent that is do not give out personal private information by email. So don't provide passwords or a lot of identifiable personal information or credit card numbers or that sort of thing by email unless you very much trust the sender. Even if you know it's the correct sender, sending that information by email may not be the best way to get that information to them, and we'll talk about that in one of the later attempts that we look at, later types of fraud. But to be extra safe, I would say don't give that information out by email. If there is a link in an email that's taking you to the company's website, I would never use the link in that email because I don't know that it's a true link to their actual website. Fraudsters are really good at setting up dummy websites that look exactly like the website you're supposed to be going to, and it would be a different website that's set up to collect information. So what I would do is if I got an email from my bank asking me to log into my account to provide them some information, I would go on my own to the website of the bank that I normally use through my browser and navigate there that way. Always monitor your accounts. So whether it's your bank account or an eBay account or other online accounts where your credit card and personal information is stored, watch them for unusual activity. And when you do get emails saying that there's unusual activity, go ahead and log into your accounts as you normally would, again, not through that email, but through your browser directly, and look to see if there's any unusual activity for you. And to be extra safe, you may want to change your password just in case if you think something's happened. One of the strongest ways that you can protect yourself is by using malware and spyware protection. So there are lots of programs out there, both free and paid, that will scan your system for malware and spyware that's been installed on your system, and that will help you find those programs before they do too much damage. So again, malware and spyware are programs that are installed on your computer that collect information about your computer or that cause problems with your computer running on an ongoing basis. Now that we've looked at how you can identify phishing and how to prevent phishing, let's look at a specific phishing example that you may or may not have seen before so you can see in practice exactly how you would look at this. So what you see on your screen here is a screenshot of a text message that one of my employees received recently. So I'll point out some of the features on it that you would look at, but what this text is saying is that Rogers Mobility Inc. Has sent you an internet e-transfer due to a payment error. Click here to deposit your funds, and there's a link below. And once you click on the link, it asks you to provide some financial information so that they can send you the money. In this case, this one specifically asked you to provide your credit card number so they can credit those funds back to your credit card. So there's a few risk factors here that we can identify that really tell us that this is phishing. So first of all, my staff member deleted this right away when she got it. She sent it on to me so that I could use it as an example in this course, but then she deleted it because Rogers Mobility Inc., while it's similar to the name of a company, Rogers Mobility, is not exactly the same name as Rogers, who she does have her cell phone with. And then normally, Rogers doesn't send her messages this way by text. They might send her reminders that get her to log into her account and that sort of thing, but they don't send her actual action to do by text. Another really interesting indicator on this one, and I had to cover it up to protect the staff member's privacy, but this text actually was showing as coming from her own cell phone number. So that showed up at the top of the text. That's the area I blocked out with a white bar, again, because it's her personal phone number. But that's an indicator. It's a little unusual that you'd get that from yourself. Another unusual way that you might see it is it may come from an area code that's unfamiliar to you. So I've seen a lot of them coming from 418 area codes. Those are area codes, I believe, in the Salt Lake City area. So it would be very unusual for a Canadian-based company to be sending a message from a US-based phone number. So that's another trigger that might let you know that you want to take this very cautiously. As we said before, here there's a financial incentive. They're saying that there's a refund or funds available to you that you can deposit. Now, What I would ask myself here as an additional question is, did I make a payment to this company recently? Even if I am a Rogers client and I think this is genuine, if I haven't paid them recently, it wouldn't make sense that I would have a refund due. And before I ever went to claim a refund, I'd want to check my payment history with them directly on their site to see if there was, in fact, an overpayment made. And that would always be reflected on my statement. And then the final thing that I might do if I was really curious is reach out to Rogers directly for a couple of reasons. One, they could verify whether this was something genuinely from them. And two, if you let them know about the scam, they'll send that out to their users and post that on their website that this scam exists. Let's move on now and look at the second type of fraud that we're going to cover in this course. So this is what's called spoofing. So spoofing, as you might expect from the name, is about using fake information. Specifically, it's when a fraudster has access to your email contact list or your login credentials and is sending emails from your email address. There's a few ways that they can do this, but the first part is they have to have information about your email service. So they often have gained access to this information through a phishing attack. So in the phishing attack, they may have collected your password for your email server, or they may have installed malware on your computer that is going to access your email and send emails on your behalf. So again, malware is a type of program that gets installed on your computer that does something to your computer that you're not intending. In this case, what it would be doing is sending emails that aren't actually from you to other people. Now, these spoofed emails are often there to phish for information from other people, so get their information, or to install malware or spyware on other people's computers. So what you'll often see, and it can be a lot easier to spot these than maybe a phishing attempt, is an email from a person with no subject line or with a generic subject line, and it will say something like, look at this great opportunity, and then there'll be a link for them to click. And what that link does is it will take them either to a form where they put in some information of their own that the person then has access to, or that link may take them to a place that's going to install some spyware or some malware onto their computer. To spot a spoofing email, again, that email is often going to contain a link that it's asking your contacts to click on or asking you to click on if you've received it. The body of the email is going to be very general, like look at this exciting opportunity, or hey, check this out, or you're not going to believe this, or even something that might concern you, like look at these pictures I found of you. There's all kinds of different ways that people using spoof emails have to encourage people to click on that link and act. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to get you to act before you think, click on that link, and do something you'll regret later. The subject line is often going to encourage you to take action right away. Again, they don't want you to look too closely at what's going on because they want you to click on that link. Some ways to prevent this is never ever click on a link to your financial institution in an email or any other institution that you're not familiar with. Don't ever give out your email password. Use strong and varied passwords and secret questions. So use passwords that have the regular recommendations of a capital letter, a small letter, a number, and a symbol, and use a different one if you can everywhere that you use a password. Even if you have a strong password and somebody finds it out, if you use that same strong password everywhere, By them getting that one password, they may have access to all kinds of information on you. If you aren't expecting an email, don't click the links that are in that email, and watch out for anything that looks too good to be true. You, again, never want to give out your personal information by email. And another way that you can see this is in website pop-ups. This will often have these spoofing links in them. So if you get a pop-up on a website that asks you to do something like click here for more information, or you have a virus on your computer, click here to get rid of it, you wouldn't want to click on those. In addition to that, just like with phishing, you want to have good antivirus, malware, and spyware protection because if you do get malware or spyware installed because of a spoofing attempt, you want your computer security measures to be able to protect you from that. So here's an example of a spoofing email that came to me. I got it about 4 days ago, so it's pretty current as of the time of the recording of this. As you can see, there is no subject line on this. That's another thing that might be suspicious to you. I've taken out the sender in this case because it is one of our students. So it came in from an email address that I did recognize. And as you can see, the body of the email is very general. So it just says, hello, Colin, and then it has a link for me to click. That link, if you go to it, may install some malware or spyware, so I didn't click on it, or it may ask me to put my information in, so they would be phishing in that way. It is a genuine email from someone I know, but because it has a link in there, I know that it's not something that I want to click on, and that's one way that I protect myself from these kind of attacks. When this happened, one thing I did is I reached out to the person that this had come from and let them know. It's always important to do that because if a person doesn't know there are emails coming from their email address, they probably have malware or spyware on their computer that's doing that. So I reached out to this person to let them know and gave them some ideas of how to get rid of this problem. The next type of fraud that we're going to look at is phone scams. So the first two kinds were more of our online modern fraud, but phone scams go back a very long time, and they still are used today. We'll go through some specific examples of them, just like we have with the other methods. But this is when a fraudster attempts to get information, access, or resources from you by phone. So they'll usually be impersonating a person or an agency, hoping that that gains your trust and gives you the information that they're looking for. And sometimes they can be very, very persistent, and they can be very, very convincing. So they could be trying to collect your information to commit other frauds or other scams. They could be trying to get access to your property, so they could be trying to get control of your computer. Or they could be trying to get you to give them money or other resources to commit theft directly from you. So a few ways that you can spot a phone scam is ask yourself, just like with phishing, do you have any dealings with this agency? If you do, then your next step might be to say, well, when I deal with this agency, is this the way they normally contact me? So do they normally contact me by phone? And if they normally contact you by phone, is this the person you normally deal with at this agency? Once you've determined that it is someone that you deal with and that it would be normal for them to contact you by phone for information, ask yourself, is this request reasonable? Is this something they would normally ask me to do over the phone? Or is this something that I would normally have to do in a different way? So a couple of ways that you can prevent yourself from being a victim of phone fraud. You can't necessarily stop the attempts from happening, but some ways you can prevent them from being successful is if a person insists that they're from an agency you know and that you deal with, ask them for a way to identify themselves, and contact the agency from their publicly available contact details. So go to the company's website and find a number, or go to the phone book and find a number for them. Use something that's part of the public domain that this person wouldn't have been able to change to get in touch with them. Often when you try to do this, if it is a scam, then the person will continue to be persistent and say you have to deal with them over the phone on this call without calling them back, or that there's no way to identify them or no way to call them back. Those, to me, are always red flags that something is really wrong here. Because if this is a legitimate business inquiry, then they're going to have a way for you to get back to them. Even if it is an urgent matter, you should be able to reach out to the business directly and talk to them that way, specifically because businesses know that phone scams exist and have existed for quite some time. From your perspective as a business person, if you're looking at ways to protect your clients, one way to protect them from phone scams is when you're meeting with them, always tell them how you're going to communicate with them. So tell them what you're going to ask, what you would ask them over the phone and what you wouldn't ask them over the phone, or what you would ask them by email and what you wouldn't ask them by email. That way, when they get a call from someone that's claiming to be from your organization, they'll already have it in their mind whether this is reasonable and this is how that you would connect with them. A few phone scam examples that are relatively recent. Some of them are still going on right now. Some of them are from the last few years. The first one is a Canada revenue scam that I see every year leading up to tax time. And it'll be a phone call from someone saying they're with Canada Revenue and that you have an outstanding tax bill with them. And they may say it's $5,000 or $10,000 or some other amount. And then once they've told you how much it is and gotten you really concerned, what they'll say is that if you don't resolve this, that there's possible jail time for you, but that for especially today, if you can resolve this with them while they're on the phone, they'll let you pay a smaller amount to resolve this issue. So there's a few flags here. One is that they'll let you pay a smaller amount. The other is that you have to resolve this today or there's a dire consequence. So they're saying things like, if you don't resolve this today, I'm going to send the police to arrest you right now. The court system in Canada doesn't work that way. It's not going to work that quickly. Financial theft generally is not enforced by immediate jail time. The police may contact you if it's a genuine case of financial theft, but that's not the way it's going to happen. And then another red flag that you would find further into the conversation is they're not asking you to transfer money to Canada Revenue. They usually ask for you to go and buy a bunch of gift cards for various vendors and provide them with the numbers of those gift cards. When that comes up, what I would ask myself is, why would Canada Revenue want gift cards rather than money from my bank? So that's something to consider. And then they will try to leverage the seriousness of the amount that's owed to them to keep you on the phone and to get you to resolve it on the phone with them rather than calling back. However, any government agency is required to have a callback number that you can phone into so that you can determine that it's not fraud. The second example we'll look at is a Microsoft example that I've heard of relatively recently and still goes on, where someone calls in and claims to be Microsoft and tells you that you have a computer virus and that you need to give them access to your computer by going to a certain website or by clicking a link in an email that they send you. There are a few triggers here that would tell you that this is fraud. One, usually they don't have very good information on you, so they won't know your email address or they may not know your name. Two, they won't give you a callback number to phone into at Microsoft. Three, you may not even have a computer and they would still phone you, or you may not have any Microsoft programs on your computer. What they are attempting to do here is take control of your computer so that they can do what's called ransoming your computer. So what they do is they take control of your computer, they lock it down, and then they tell you that they'll only unlock the access if you pay them to do it. Or they'll refer you to another service that will let you unlock the access to your computer, and you have to pay them. So as you can see, this is more direct financial crime here. The third and final example that I'm going to look at of phone scams is a prize example. So I don't know if you've gotten this one, but I know from time to time I'll get phone calls, often several phone calls in a day and then nothing for several months, telling me that I've won 100,000 air miles. It seems very suspicious to me that I would get a random call about this. And when you do talk to the person, when you connect through past the automated message, what you'll find is they're trying to get strange information to complete the gift to you of the air miles. So one thing that I've been asked for in this process is, I went through this just to see what they would ask me. I realized quite quickly that it was fraudulent. So once they had me on the phone, what they said is that this offer is only valid for people over 25 years of age. So we need your credit card number to verify that you're over 25 years of age. My response to them was that my credit card company number doesn't verify anything about my age. At best, your credit card number is going to let someone know that you're an adult, so over the age of majority in your province. But it is possible that it might not even do that if if your bank allows authorized users under the age of majority. So really all that you're going to do by giving them your credit card details is give them a way to charge your credit card. And if you give those details out over the phone, while eventually your credit card company may be able to retrieve those funds for you, it could be quite difficult for them to do so. So the next kind of fraud that we're going to talk about is what's called a man-in-the-middle attack. Now, a man-in-the-middle attack is a form of cyber attack. Again, it's about collecting information, and the time when your information is vulnerable to a man-in-the-middle attack is when your information is being transmitted from an unsecure website to another unsecure website. So when you're going to see this is if your page is redirected in a browser and you're transmitting credit card information or you're transmitting password information from one page to another, then you may be vulnerable to a man-in-the-middle attack. Sometimes they'll be looking for financial information like credit card details or banking information. Sometimes they'll be looking for personal information like your personally identifiable information like your name, address, social insurance number, and so on. And sometimes they may be looking for login information like your username and password. Depending on which of these kinds of information they're collecting, it could be used for phishing, spoofing, or other types of fraud. So as we've seen throughout this course, the various types of fraud that we look at are quite interconnected. So unlike the other types of fraud, there isn't a really easy way to spot a man-in-the-middle attack because you don't necessarily know when it's happening because it isn't involving you actually doing anything or giving any information actively. It's a passive form of fraud that happens in the background in online settings. You may be able to tell areas where it's likely to happen. So when a website starts with http:// rather than https:// those websites that don't have the S are more vulnerable to this kind of attack. So on the flip side, when we look at prevention, one of the prevention measures would be when you're putting personal information into a site, you always want to look for a secure site. That's a site that starts with the https://. The other thing you may see is in some browsers you may see a picture of a padlock, and that padlock will either be open or closed. If the padlock is open, it means it's an unsecure website. If the padlock is closed, then that means it's a secure website. So, as I said, there's limited ways to prevent and spot this from happening. Some other preventions are some things we've mentioned before, like using different passwords when you're on different websites. So if you use the same password on multiple websites, and that password is taken fraudulently through a man-in-the-middle attack, then if you've used that password elsewhere, you may have created vulnerability for yourself across multiple websites. And that's one of the things that fraudsters in these type of attacks are counting on. While it is difficult to remember multiple passwords, there is a benefit in that it protects you in the long run. Another thing that you can consider if you're using multiple passwords is one of the password manager programs that are out there. They have higher level of security and they store multiple passwords for you so that you aren't constantly struggling to remember a variety of different passwords. The third prevention tip that we'll go over here is to watch out for being rerouted from one domain to another. So when you're on one website and then you notice that the URL or the address in the top bar is totally different on the next page you're on, you just need to ask yourself what kind of vulnerability might be there. So for this specific set of examples, I'm going to talk about a redirect of financial information, and then I'm going to talk about a redirect of personal password information. Both of these are fictitious examples. I'll use our business as an example of how it could happen, but we've put measures in place to reduce the likelihood of this. In terms of financial information, what you could see is if you went to the Business Career College website to purchase something, and our website didn't have a secure encryption in place, when we redirect you to our payment portal in PayPal, then that's a place where a man-in-the-middle attack could happen. So what this would look like is when information was sent from our purchasing e-commerce website to PayPal, if we didn't have an HTTPS or a secure encrypted address, then a man-in-the-middle attack would find it much easier to retrieve that financial information when it's sent. Now, you have to keep in mind that you want the secure encryption on both the sending and receiving sides of the pages that you're directing from. So it's not good enough just to have a secure page sending the information. You also want a secure page receiving the information. So in this case, both the Business Career College commerce website where you purchase things and the PayPal website where your credit card information is processed are both secure websites. Now, with a redirect of personal or password information, we could be looking at a very similar situation. Several years ago, one of our technology providers talked to us about secure encryption on our Moodle website. So that's why when you go to the Moodle website, it's an HTTPS start to the address, not an HTTP. The reason we do that is if we use YouTube videos, for example, so we wouldn't want your password or your personal information sent out to the world unencrypted when we link you to a YouTube video in your courses. By having that secure encryption in place, we limit the ability of fraudsters to commit a man-in-the-middle attack. Now, this security measure doesn't prevent it entirely. However, it makes it incredibly difficult for someone to retrieve and decrypt the information that we're sending. The final kind of fraud that we're going to look at is identity theft. I was a victim of identity theft myself a few years ago, so this is a type of fraud that is very close to me, that I have some very personal experience with, and I'll share that later on in the example portion of this section. But what identity theft is that's one of the ways that your personal information can be used once it's obtained by a fraudster. So once they've used one of the other methods we talked about, phishing or spoofing, or maybe a man-in-the-middle attack, or a variety of other methods, then they go ahead and use that information, typically for financial gain, and that would be things like applying for credit, making major rentals or major purchases in your name so that you're responsible for them, with the intention that they are not going to repay or make good on the commitments that they've committed you to. However, it could be used for any sort of application that would benefit the fraudster. So if they are signing up for an account with a website with the intent to commit more fraud, perhaps by getting an account inside, they could use your information to do that, and rather than implicate themselves, implicate you in the situation. So we'll talk a little bit about how to spot identity theft, and then how to prevent it. So some ways to spot identity theft: if you're working with a client that you're unfamiliar with, ID that appears to be damaged or just looks like it's altered in some way, that's always something to be suspicious of. So you'd want to ask for different ID in that case. Um, when you're going, if you have access to credit bureau reports when you're working with your clients, it's a good idea to go through what's showing up on their credit bureau with them so that they can see if anything in there is unusual or appears unusual to them. And then in this case, a sudden change in consumer or client behavior could also be an indication of identity theft. So what we mean there is if there's a client of the business you work for who always deals with a very specific person at your office and suddenly wants to deal with someone different, or then that's something you may want to look at, because it could be an indication that they don't want someone that knows the actual person to deal with them when they're committing identity theft. Another thing to look at would be is if there's suddenly transactions in your business that are highly unusual, you'd want to look into that a little further. That leads us into prevention. So when you are working with your clients, one method of prevention is to ask for multiple pieces of ID and inspect them carefully. So you're looking for ID that's damaged or altered. So if you see any of that, it could be an indication that something's wrong. Verify information that it would be hard for this identity thief to obtain. So rather than asking for information that, for example, could be found on ID that was stolen, like a date of birth, you may want to ask about history with your agency or your organization, transactions that they've done in the past with you, because that's likely not something that the identity thief may have access to. To prevent your identity from being stolen, there are a couple of things that you can do. First of all, you don't want to carry around unnecessary ID with you that gives a potential identity theft more ID to use. So that would include things like locking your passport and your social insurance number up in your safe or in a safe place in your house, rather than carrying those with you when you don't need them. The other thing that you can put in place as a person trying to protect yourself from identity theft is credit bureau monitoring for yourself. So that can be manually done with the credit bureaus for free once a year, or you can set paid services in place that will place flags on your credit bureau and give you regular updates as to the activity that's happening on your credit bureau. Not all identity theft activities are going to be financial in nature that report to a credit bureau, but many of them are. So that's a very important place to watch your transactional history. So a couple of examples that I'm going to give, and the first is a very personal one to me. One way that identity theft can happen is through lost or stolen ID. So several years ago, I lost my wallet, or I thought I lost it, somewhere between home and work one day. And I didn't think too much of it right away because I actually wasn't looking for my wallet until a few days later. I didn't need anything out of it because I had kept my debit card separate from my wallet just because I'd put it in my pocket after I'd used it. So I had no reason to go in there until one day I was looking for a specific card from my wallet and I realized I couldn't find my wallet. About a day after that, or the same day actually, what I realized is I tried to log into my online banking and I no longer could log into it. So I called my bank and found out through that process that a new bank card had been issued on my account. And after several weeks of investigation, what I found out is that the person that had stolen my ID had altered my ID, used that to have a new bank card issued on my bank account, and had committed financial fraud that way. Now, in the long run, everything was resolved for me and it got sorted out. It did take about 3 weeks on the banking side for the financial ramifications to get sorted out. So for my account to be reactivated and for any fraudulent spending to be reimbursed to me. But up to this day, it still causes problems for me because one of the things I had to do after that happened was put flagging on my credit bureau. So anytime I do a credit application, there's extra verification in place for me. And it has happened that about 2 or 3 months after the initial fraud was committed, someone tried again to get a bank card issued on my bank account. Luckily, my bank had put extra security on my account in place because of this situation. But as you can see, it's a very long, drawn-out situation when this does happen. The second way that this could happen is through stolen personal information. So if someone gets your information through, for example, a phishing attack, what you may see is a number of unexpected credit inquiries come up. So they might apply for a bunch of credit cards using the information that they captured from you. Let's take some time now to look at some best practices that you personally can take in your own life to reduce the impact of fraud on you. You always want to verify the source of anyone asking information from you, like we said, through various attacks. With phishing or spoofing or even a phone scam, you want to know who it is that's asking this information from you and double check that it's the correct person. So if, for example, you receive a phone call that seems suspicious, before giving them information, double check who they are and try reaching them directly at the company or the agency that they're trying to contact you from. This is going to ensure that a fraudster can't claim to be from another organization and trick you into giving information. And when you're doing that double check, use public information to contact those agencies. So this is there's a couple of ways that we can look at this. One, if you're looking at a phone scam, then you want to call back the agency from the public information. But when you receive an email that seems suspicious to you, Like we said before, don't click any links that are in the email to contact that organization. Use whatever your regular method of contacting that organization would be. That's going to limit the impact that fraudsters can have on you when they're trying to obtain your information. Software protection is another big area where there's a lot of opportunity for you to use this to protect yourself. So we talked earlier that in phishing and in spoofing, often the fraudster is trying to use malware or spyware to get information about you. So you can definitely get software that regularly checks your system automatically, gives you reports of anything that it finds, and gets regular updates. Those types of software are sometimes available for free. There are also paid versions that are available. It all depends on what kind of specific features you want in a protection software. One of the key differences is often the free versions of the software will have all of the same features of the paid version, except the paid version may work automatically for you and automatically do scans and protect your computer and your information. So it would be up to you to decide whether that feature is worth paying for you. In addition to software protection, we talked a little bit about monitoring services because often the aim of a fraudster is to commit financial crimes against you. By putting monitoring in place on your credit bureau, you can protect yourself from fraud having too deep of an impact on you if they do get your information. So by regularly monitoring your credit bureau, and perhaps even having one of the credit bureau monitoring services in place, you can know as soon as possible when unusual transactions or new transactions on your credit bureau happen. One of the easiest things to do that can really have the most impact in preventing you being a victim of fraud is varying your passwords. There are two ways that we talk about this. One, you want to change your passwords regularly. So set a schedule for yourself to change your passwords on a monthly or every other month basis. And not only that, but also vary the passwords you use between the websites that you have that have password protected information. So on your banking, you'd want to use a different password than you would for your email and for any other websites that you may have access to, because if someone does end up getting access to one of those passwords, you don't want to compound your problem by giving them access to multiple different sites that have your information. That will just make it all the worse for you. Now, when you vary your passwords like that and have different passwords for different sites, it can be difficult to remember all the passwords. So one tool that can help you manage that is something called a password manager. There are lots of password managers out there, and what that is that's an encrypted online storage of your passwords that remembers passwords for you and may even automatically log you into sites when you're logged into that password manager. Again, though, your password manager password should be changed regularly and should be a strong password like we talked about in this course. Now let's look at a few ways that you can use the information that we provided in this course to protect your clients, because that's another responsibility that you have as someone working in a financial services related job. So the first key thing I would say is always verify who you're speaking with. And again, try to verify things that are a little unusual that your client, anyone but your client wouldn't know. So look perhaps at transactions within your own business as an additional verification method. When I say verify who you're speaking with, I mean over the phone, in person, and even electronically when you're speaking with someone. So again, you want to use those difficult to obtain pieces of verification. So definitely not something that would be available in public, like just the name, but you may want to verify additional, more personal pieces of information. And like I said, one of the best ways is to verify pieces of information from their history with your organization. When you're meeting with your clients, let them know how you are going to contact them and ways that you won't contact them. So it's very common in banking, for example, for a banker to tell you that they will never contact you by email to request your personal information. The same thing can be said with credit card companies and other payment processors. I don't know of any of those types of institutions that will ask for your personal information directly in an email. The most that I've seen them do is notify you when there's unusual activity on your account. And then the final thing that you can look at is share information that you know about fraud and about scams with your clients. Let them know how serious fraud can be and how easy it can be to become a victim of fraud, that it does happen to people, and focus on helping them know the tips to spot and prevent those frauds. So sometimes when we talk too much about the type of fraud itself, it may just scare your client, but what you really want to do is give them the best tools to protect themselves. So I'm going to wrap up the course now. Once you finish watching this course, if you've scored 60% or higher on the questions as you work through the course, you will receive a continuing education certificate for this course. To review, today we talked about what fraud is. So that is the misuse of information, usually for some kind of gain. Then we went through 5 types of fraud. Now, there are more than 5 types of fraud out there, but I went through 5 of the common types of fraud that we see these days. So those are phishing, spoofing, phone scams, man-in-the-middle attacks, and identity theft. Now, those first 4 types of fraud are really ways of fraudsters to get your information, and often they'll get that information in order to be able to commit identity theft and use that in some way for their financial gain. Once we'd reviewed those 5 types of fraud, for each of them, we looked at some ways to identify that fraud and ways to prevent that kind of fraud from happening. And then we looked at some specific examples of what that fraud looks like in the real world. I hope you enjoyed your course today and that it was a learning experience for you. I look forward to seeing you in future continuing education courses, and have a great day.